morning, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jen Jen and from Jen Jen's Creations, and I wanted to welcome everyone to True Crime Corner video today. And the next case that we're going to be talking about, I have debated and debated and debated for God knows how long about this. And I didn't know if I wanted to do this just because, but just because I didn't know, But anyway, I don't know how many of you have heard of Ruby Ridge. And this was a standoff in Idaho that took place in 1992. And so to be truthful, I never even heard about Ruby Ridge. I heard about it in passing and so forth, but I never really knew what actually happened. So I thought I would go ahead and, excuse me, and just share it with you. I've had this saved for a while to do, and I've just been kind of procrastinating and chickening out. So bear with me while we go through this. Now, this was, like I said, this was a standoff that took place, excuse me, in Boundary County, Idaho. And it began, it was an 11-day siege. And it began on August the 21st of 1992 when deputies of the United States Marshals initiated an action to apprehend and initiated action to under a bench warrant to apprehend and arrest Randy Reaver for his failure to appear on a firearms charge. There were he was given three conflicting dates for his court appearance, and suspecting a conspiracy, he refused to surrender. And members of his immediate family and a family friend resisted arrest. And then the hostage negotiation team from the FBI became involved as the siege developed. So we're going to get into this. This is really all one big thing. So we're going to get into this. So bear with me, guys, because this could get a little confusing. I did do a lot of research, but it basically was the same thing that I found. During the Marshal Service, I guess, siege of the property, six U.S. Marshals had encountered Harris and Sammy Weaver, who was Randy's 14-year-old son, in the woods near the family cabin. A shootout took place. Deputy U.S. Marshal William Deegan, Sammy Weaver, and the Weaver's dog, Stryker, all died as a result. In the subsequent siege of the residence that was led by the FBI, Weaver's wife was killed by a sniper. All casualties occurred in the first 2 days of the operation. The siege and the standoff were ultimately resolved by civilian negotiators. Harris surrendered and was arrested on August the 30th, while Randy and his 3 daughters surrendered the next day. They were arraigned on a variety of federal and criminal charges, including first-degree murder and the death of Deegan. Now, I'm going to stop in the middle of that, and I'm going to get into who Randy Weaver was, and that'll kind of give you kind of a little, background on him. Now, Randy was a former U.S. Army engineer, and his family, he surrendered to the federal officers 11 days after the accident. Now, a month, was it a month before? Was it a month before? Okay. A month before right before Ruby Ridge, a month after he left the Army, Weaver and his wife, Victoria, were married. They found work at a local John Deere. He found work at a local John Deere factory. His wife became a secretary, and then became a housewife. Now, on a side note, I don't know if he really was, but he started basically, I don't want to say he was a white supremacist, but that's what they're labeling him as. So we're just going to go with that. He subscribed to the belief of the Christian identity, which holds. Anyway, Vicky developed the same set of beliefs, and anyway, then it eventually led to the Ruby Ridge accident or incident, and of course he, again said that there was some kind of conspiracy because of his court dates were, getting all confused, so forth and so on. And so he what ended up happening was he ended up going and basically holding himself up in a cabin, which is where he was living, and he homeschooled his children, and his wife had given birth to his children in the cabin. Even though there were conflicting reports of all this, so let's just go with this. So please bear with me while I try to go through all this, because it's very confusing. This is one reason why I don't like going through all this, because there's a lot of different info and a lot of conflicting things. Now, a shootout did take place, and the Weaver's dog, Stryker, and Sammy Weaver and a U.S. Marshal died. Then, which died in result, the siege of the Weaver residence, led by the FBI. Randy Weaver's wife, Vicky, was killed by FBI sniper fire. All casualties occurred in the first 2 days of the operation. Eventually, Kevin Harris surrendered and was arrested on August the 30th. And while Weaver and his 3 daughters surrendered the next day. Weaver and Harris were arraigned on a variety of federal criminal charges, including first-degree murder for the death of Deegan. Harris was acquitted. Weaver was acquitted, except for the charges for the original bail condition of the violation for the arms charge and for having missed his court date. He was fined $10,000, sentenced to 18 months in prison, and he was credited with time served. Which I kind of... See, this is what confuses me, okay? You're having a standoff with the FBI, and he doesn't get charged for anything else except for the original charge. See, this is one thing I did not understand. Now, he did go to trial, and Weaver's attorney made accusations of criminal wrongdoing against the agencies that were involved in the incident. At the end of the trial, the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility formed a task force, which was called the Ruby Ridge Task Force, to investigate Spence's charges. There was a redacted version of the report publicly released by a outside source, raised questions about all the agencies that participated in Ruby Ridge, about their conduct and their policies, and they made this report. Eventually, both the Weaver family and the Harris families brought civil suits against the government over the firefight and the siege. The Weavers won a combined out-of-court settlement in 1995 for $3.1 million. So now, as you all know, they have Senate hearings and so forth. Now, to answer public questions about Ruby Ridge, the Senate held hearings between September the 6th and October the 19th. They issued a report that called for reforms in federal law enforcement to prevent a repeat of the losses of life at Ruby Ridge. It was noted that the Ruby Ridge incident and the 1993 Waco incident solved many of the same agencies and the same personal. See, it just doesn't make any sense. It's all. Now, I'm sorry, it didn't tell me how this all started. Now, I will tell you this much. In 1984, this is telling it how, I guess it kind of became involved, how it all started. So, after the birth of their son, Samuel, the Weavers began to sell all their belongings and began to live without electricity. This is before he got into whatever beliefs he was into. And they bought 20 acres of land on Ruby Ridge and began building a cabin. The property was in Boundary County on the hillside on Ruby Creek opposite Caribou Ridge. And in 1984, Randy Weaver and his neighbor Terry Kinnison had a dispute over a $3,000 land deal. Kinnison lost the dispute and was ordered to pay Weaver an additional $2,100. Then Kinnison wrote letters to the FBI, Secret Service, and the county sheriff, alleging that Randy Weaver had threatened to kill Pope John Paul II, President Reagan, and the governor of Idaho at the time. This is what began all of this, okay? So bear with me. In 1985, in January, the FBI and the Secret Service began an investigation of these allegations that Randy had made threats against Reagan and other government and law enforcement officials. On February the 12th, Randy and Vicky were interviewed by 2 FBI agents and 2 Secret Service agents and the Boundary County Sheriff and his chief investigator. The Secret Service had been told that Weaver was a member of a white supremacist group and that he had a large weapons cache at his residence. Weaver denied the allegations and the government filed no charges. On 3 of the 4 occasions, he did attend meetings for white supremacy at Hayden Lake, where there was a compound for government resistors. The investigation noted that Weaver associated with a known associate of a white supremacist group. Weaver told the investigators that neither he nor the Komnick were members of this white supremacist group. On February the 28th, Randy and Vicky filed an affidavit with the county courthouse alleging that their enemies were plotting to provoke the FBI into attacking and killing the Weaver family. See, this is where I'm getting really, really confused. I'm not sure if there's something wrong with him, mentally, or if because he's been, going to these different meetings that he feels, I don't know. I really don't. I try to understand everybody's beliefs, but when stuff like this happens, it makes it very, very hard. On May 6th, Randy and Vicky sent President Reagan a letter claiming that Weaver's enemies may have sent the president a threatening letter under a forged signature. Okay, now see, this is where I would think that he would be accused of this. There was no evidence of the letter, but the 1985 letter was cited by the prosecutor in 1992 as overt Act 7 of the Weaver family conspiracy against the federal government. See, this is just also confusing. All right, now the ATF eventually gets involved in July 1986 when Randy Weaver was introduced to a confidential ATF informant. The informant portrayed himself as a weapons dealer. Weaver was then invited to a meeting. The original target by Frank Komnick, the original target of the ATF investigation. It was Weaver's first time at this actual big meeting of this, Aryan, whatever it is. Over the next 3 years, Weaver and the informant met several times. And in July of 1989, Weaver invited the informant to his home to discuss forming a group to fight, basically, the U.S. government. In October of 1989, the ATF claimed that Weaver had sold the informant 2 sawed-off shotguns with an overall length of the guns shorter than the limit set by what is stated by federal law. In November of 1989, Weaver then accused the informant of being a spy for the police. Weaver later wrote that he had been warned by Rico 5, the informant's handler, Herb something or other, ordered him to have no further contact with Weaver. Eventually, the FBI informant outed the ATF informant to the Aryan Nation, which, as you all know, Weaver was, trying to be a part of. In 1990, the informant's handler attempted to use the sawed-off shotgun charge as leverage to get Weaver to act as an informant for his investigation into the Aryan Nation. Weaver did refuse to become the snitch, and the ATF filed the gun charges in June of 1990. Then they claimed that Weaver was a bank robber with criminal convictions. Of course, those claims were false. The Senate investigation did find out that Weaver was not a suspect in any kind of bank robberies whatsoever. A federal grand jury then indicted Weaver in December of 1990 for making and possessing, but not for selling, illegal weapons in October of 1989. The ATF concluded that it was too dangerous for agents to arrest Weaver at his property. In January of 1991, ATF agents posed as broken down motorists and arrested Weaver when he and his wife stopped to assist. Weaver was told of the charges against him. He was, released on bail and told that his trial would begin on February 19th of 1991. On January the 22nd, the judge in the case notified an attorney, Everett Hoffmeister, that he would be Randy Weaver's attorney. The same day, Weaver called the U.S. probation officer and told him that he had been instructed to contact Richens on that date. Richens didn't have the case file, so he asked Weaver to leave his contact information and that he would contact him back when he had received the paperwork for him. Now, the funny part about all that is Randy Weaver didn't give Richens a telephone number. Hoffmeister sent Randy Weaver letters on January the 19th, the 31st, and February the 5th, asking Randy to contact him to work on his defense within the federal court system. On February the 5th, the trial date was changed from the 19th to the 20th to give participants more time to travel following a federal holiday. The court clerk sent the letters informing them of the date, but the notice was not sent directly to Weaver, only to Hoffmeister. So if that makes any sense, it seems to me like there was a clerical error. If that makes any sense. It seems to me like they never really, how do I put it? It never really got to him. If that makes any kind of sense whatsoever. I don't know. Now, on February the 7th, his probation officer, Weaver's probation officer, sent a letter indicating that he had the case file and that he did need to talk to Randy. This letter said that Weaver's trial date was March the 20th. On February the 8th, Hoffmeister began to attempt to contact Randy Weaver by letter, informing him that his trial was to begin on February the 20th. See, now this is confusing. Okay? See where I'm getting at with this? Randy Weaver's probation officer sent him a letter stating that his trial is on March the 20th, but yet his lawyer sends a letter informing him that his trial is on February the 20th. Is either confusion, clerical error, or something. And Hoffmeister wanted him to contact him immediately, and he did make several phone calls asking them to have Weaver call him. Then he did tell the district court judge that he had been unable to reach Weaver before the scheduled court date. Now, when Randy Weaver did not appear on February the 20th, the judge issued a bench warrant for failure to appear. Now, remember, I could possibly see why Randy Weaver was a little confused. No, I don't condone what happened at Ruby Ridge, but I'm saying is I could see where it would be a little confusing. Not saying, I agree with, why Randy Weaver did what he did, because I don't. I just think it's all ridiculous. So on the 26th of February, Ken Keller, a reporter for a local newspaper, telephoned the U.S. probation office and asked whether Weaver did not show in court on February the 20th because the letter Richardson sent him had an incorrect date. They did find a copy of the letter. The chief probation officer, Terrence Hummel, contacted Ryan's clerk and informed them of the incorrect date in the letter. He then also contacted the U.S. Marshal Service and Weaver's attorney, informing them both of the error. The judge, however, did refuse to withdraw the bench warrant. But the U.S. Marshal Service agreed to put off executing the warrant until after March 20th in order to see whether Weaver would show up in court on that day. And if he were to show up, the Department of Justice claimed that all indications are that the warrant should have been dropped. But instead, the U.S. Attorney's Office called a grand jury on March the 14th. They did not inform the grand jury of Richardson's letter, and the grand jury issued an indictment for failure to appear. So I'm really, this is just baffling me because I'm really confused now. Now I'm gonna tell you something. I don't believe in government conspiracies. To be truthful, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other unless it's happened to me personally. But this just is all just really confusing, and I don't understand. Anyway, when the Weaver case passed from the ATF to the United States Marshal Service, no one had informed the marshals that the ATF had attempted to solicit Weaver as an informant. Now, why they didn't do that, I don't know. I don't understand. I'm confused as to why they did not do that. But because they are considered a law enforcement arm of the federal court, the U.S. Marshals were responsible to arrest and bring in Weaver, which was now considered a fugitive. Now, Weaver didn't leave, didn't, skip town or anything like that. He just simply stayed in his cabin and just threatened to resist anybody that attempted to come and take him by force. He was known to have, did have a intense distrust of the government. Now, he did eventually come to believe that he would not receive a fair trial. Which, okay, I don't know why he wouldn't. I mean, I would think I would, but anyway. They made several attempts to have Weaver surrender peacefully, but he did refuse to leave his cabin. He negotiated with the U.S. Marshals and through third parties from March the 5th to October the 12th. 1991, when the assistant U.S. attorney directed that negotiations cease. Now, even though they stopped the negotiations, the U.S. attorney had directed that all negotiations go through Weaver's attorney, but Weaver refused to talk with him. So now they stopped the negotiations. They made other contact. The U.S. Marshal Ron Evans and Jeff Clough drove to the Weaver property and spoke with Weaver, and they posed as real estate prospects. On March the 27th, they started doing surveillance. They were dispatched. Cameras were set up to record activity at Weaver's residence. Marshals observed that Weaver responded to vehicles and other visitors by basically taking up armed positions around the cabin until they knew who the visitors were. So, it was just a lot. Now, the encounter near the cabin. Okay. There were 6 marshals that were sent to scout the area on August the 21st of 1992. To scout the area to determine suitable places away from the cabin to apprehend and arrest Randy Weaver. They were dressed, the marshals were dressed in military camouflage. At one point, one of the marshals threw 2 rocks at the Weaver cabin to test the dogs' reactions. Now, mind you, there were dogs in the cabin. The action provoked the dogs and Randy's friend Kevin Harris and Randy's son Samuel to emerge and follow the dog Stryker to investigate. They later said that they were hoping the dog had noticed a game animal since the cabin was out of meat. They claimed the dogs were alerted to the recon team in the woods after neighbors at the foot of the mountain started their pickup truck. The team retreated, and then Sammy Weaver and Kevin Harris followed Stryker on foot through the woods, while Randy, also on foot, took a separate logging trail. Victoria, Sarah, and Rachel and the baby remained at the cabin. They were anxious to get there first, but then relaxed. Randy did encounter the marshals at the Y. Back off. Roderick claimed to have yelled, "Back off, U.S. Marshal," and then the dog and the boy came out of the woods about a minute later. The firefight erupted between the marshals and Sammy Weaver and Harris after one of the marshals shot and killed the dog. So it sounds to me like it was just all this craziness, and there's a lot of different, it's a lot of he said, she said kind of stuff, because you have the Randy Weaver side claiming that, the U.S. Marshals were the first ones to basically shoot first and so forth and so on. And then you have, there's 2 sides to this story, I guess, is what I'm saying. Now, this is where the controversy comes into play and the siege. Now, I know y'all are like, really? So after the firefight, um, United States Marshal Dave Hunt requested immediate support and alerted the FBI that a marshal had been killed. The Marshal Service Crisis Center was activated. The marshals were alerted to deploy in response to the call. The Boundary County Sheriff's Office mobilized, also in response. Now, I mean, there was a lot of people that went out for one man. It's just, okay. Now, on the second day of the siege, between 2:30 and 3:30, I know you all are probably confused, the FBI sniper teams were deployed and briefed to the cabin on foot. So, the negotiator arrives at that point in time. Then an FBI sniper from a position over 200 yards above the Weaver cabin shot and wounded Randy in the back with the bullet exiting his armpit while he was lifting the latch on the shed to visit the body of his dead son. Now, mind you, the sniper testifies later that he had put his crosshairs on Weaver's spine, but Weaver moved at the last second. And this was as Weaver and his 16-year-old daughter and Harris ran back toward the house. He fired the second bullet, which wounded Harris in the chest. This bullet also killed Vicki Weaver, who was standing behind the door in the cabin. She was holding their 10-month-old baby. Now, I'm not going to get into all this, but there was a big to-do over the second sniper shot. And it caused a lot of things to happen. They did, there was a memo, and this was from a higher up in law enforcement, and they didn't know that Vicki Weaver had been killed, and they wrote a memo with the following content. Something could consider. Charge against Weaver is bullshit. No one saw Weaver do any shooting. Vicki has no charges against her. Weaver's defense: he ran down the hill to see what dog was barking at. Some guy in camis shot his dog, started shooting at him, killed his son. Harris did the shooting. He's in a pretty strong legal position. Does that make sense to you guys? But anyway, the standoff did eventually get resolved, and Weaver did surrender on August 30th. He was removed by stretcher and flown to a hospital. He allowed the removal of his wife's body. He was transferred to the airport and then flown to Boise, and then he was sent to county jail and then arraigned, and then he did go to trial, and doesn't say. Okay, he was acquitted. He was acquitted of all his charges except, missing his original court date. And then his friend Harris was also acquitted. And I don't want to get into all this because it's like I said, all one big kind of conspiracy thing. They did say that all of the law enforcement agencies that were involved were guilty of wrongdoing. And of course then there was a task force that was created. And I think a lot of things, the way it sounds, is a lot of things changed after this incident, so things like this didn't happen again. I'm not saying that he was innocent. I'm not saying that anybody was in the wrong. It just sounds to me like it was one big cluster, excuse my language, clusterfuck. But that's really kind of like, that's really sort of what happened on Ruby Ridge. There's good grief. There was a movie, I didn't know this, that that was it was a CBS miniseries. And it talked about the siege of Ruby Ridge. Then Criminal Minds talks about it. And there's a mini series called Waco, and it does talk about Ruby Ridge, and I think it's like the first episode. I think I watched it. I do believe. It's very, very. This whole thing is kind of interesting because I was just like, wow. I went into this. I've heard, like I said, I've heard this in passing. I never really paid much attention to it. Not as much as I did when Waco happened, because it was right after my oldest daughter was born when Waco occurred. But this just, I'd never really heard about this, and it was just interesting to hear and to read that it was all kind of crazy. But that's the end of that one, guys. I know it's probably confusing. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to confuse you. So I hope everyone enjoyed. And if you guys have any, cases you want me to talk about, please feel free to comment below. And I will talk to you all next time. Thank you for listening, and have a great week.